is that, not only did have the difficulty with the war and the result of the war, but then you had the epidemics of yellow fever. The city went bankrupt. This really pulled Memphis out of the hole very, very, very much. It was a great boom. That's where it should have been anyway.
Yeah. Wasn't there federal legislation for a transcontinental railroad, at least funding, that was passed and took effect on January 1 of '63?
I think it was.
There were three acts: the Land Grant Act, the Land Grant College, the Homestead Act, Land Grant College Act, and the Transcontinental Railroad Act. They were all three approved and took effect January 1 of '63, because the South had been blocking the path going through the North. With secession and all of those blocking votes being gone, the remaining U.S. Legislative Congress promptly passed a legislation putting the route across the northern tier of states. But they've been blocking it, and as you pointed out, it really should have been built across the southern portion of the U.S.
Or the middle, southern.
and avoided the mountains. But the federal transcontinental legislation that paved the way was passed in the fall of '62 and took place January 1, '63. But it's all under the rug with the Emancipation Proclamation having taken effect that day.
Yeah.
Actually, it's 1869 when they completed the first transcontinental.
Right.
And it was more Kansas City, Denver, Utah. The last spike was driven at Utah, then to California, and then the second one was the northern tier.
Oh, okay, so I had it backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually there was
Well, the Golden Spike was driven in '69, so
That's
that was,
right.
But that was the northernmost.
Utah.
Oh, that's right,
Promontory
Utah.
Point.
Promontory Point.
That's right, Promontory. And there was actually the third, a lot of people don't know this, the third transcontinental railroad was completed about 1884, just a few weeks after the northern tier was completed, and it came through Memphis. Kind of an odd way. It came from Virginia, Newport News, through Huntington, Louisville, Paducah, then south down through Memphis to New Orleans, and New Orleans to California. And it was controlled by this one man, Collis Potter Huntington.
Oh, yeah.
Who I think is an unsung hero of Memphis, because the last yellow fever epidemic was in 1879, and there was strong consideration about just, this is an unhealthy place, let's just shut it down and move away. 2 years later, Collis Potter Huntington bought the railroad going north from Memphis and completed it. And then he built the railroad, another railroad going to New Orleans. So that opened up the Delta, and there we are, a growing city.
Thank you. That's really valuable information. I was unaware of that.
Yeah, but I mean,
he's always thought of
kind
it
of overlooked, but
Sure.
It was such a close time period. The end of the yellow fever in the 1879, and then the railroad building boom in the 1880s.
That's right.
And they never got any further south than Kansas, than Arkansas City. This is as far as south he got before he passed on.
What now?
And of course, there was a railroad line, Arkansas City, going up to Little Rock. That was the conjunction at that point in time.
Well, the railroads really had taken off after they were kind of curtailed a little bit by the Civil War, but from that point on, and technology had changed. By the time they got the '90s, and they had cantilever, the new open hearth steel, and it is kind of,
It was all standardized.
Sure, right.
Because they had different.
What is really amazing, we're talking on a bridge that's 125 years old, and still it's BNSF,
Yes.
which is whose railroad, if he were concerned about it, he would be, and they are doing something to kind of reinforce it now, but,
I think they constantly work on it. I worked for, or retired from the BNSF
Uh-huh.
years ago. I had 38 years working with
Uh-huh.
various railroads there. So they are constantly maintaining the bridge,
Sure.
taking out spans.
Mhm.
And I know they're doing a lot of extra work now. I think they're adding a second track. I'm not sure. I'm away from there. But it was a constant maintenance. Like
Well,
I
it-
say, you know, if something's 125 years old, if you're going to use it a lot, you're going to have to maintain it.
of course, yeah. It's like the Roman aqueduct of the railroad business.
Right.
Well, and that must be one of the more important bridges in the country as far as BNSF is concerned.
Well, I think it is. The two Memphis bridges, you know, Memphis is probably one of the 6 or 8 biggest rail centers in the country.
Right.
You know, along with Kansas City, St. Louis, New York, and, you know, some of the California cities. And of course, it's because we're on the Mississippi River. There aren't many rail crossings.
No, very,
along
very few there.
I mean, from here south, there's one in Vicksburg, then you gotta go all the way to New Orleans.
Right.
And I don't think, well,
Well,
there's one.
Doesn't Baton Rouge have one?
I'm sure they do, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
they
pretty
do.
sure I've
I said
gone
New
across
Orleans,
it.
but Louisiana, yeah.
But precious few.
It's
and
precious
so you-
few, yeah.
And east and west is actually more important in a way because you've got so much country you're covering. than-
Certainly is now with all these Asian goods coming from, landing in the Pacific ports and then being shipped across country.
Right, right. Yeah. I lived in Tucson for a while, and still my family, a lot of my family are there, and I visit. And you can see as many trains coming through there as any place on earth.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a constant thing, and you can also gauge the economy. And I think Warren Buffett mentioned this, is he can gauge the economy just by the number of rail cars in use at any one time.
Mhm.
And you can see it on the, well, you can see it right here on the bridge if you want to look.
Right. Just right out here.
So it's an incredibly important thing in the life of Memphis to have this bridge. And the fact that it is still performing, 10 times the rate it was when it was built is pretty amazing. And but it was the foresight of whoever were running this, besides the government, obviously wanting it here. That was the key to having it built, I'm sure. And it's fun to look at the incredible, tedious job it was to get, even though it's a railroad, to get the cars over from one side or the other before the bridge.
Right.
And that was one of the main things I wanted to show was it's just like going from the Stone Age to the era or something like that.
Those tracks are still used today.
Is it really?
It's
Down across from
Kansas
President
Avenue down,
Mhm.
that's the way you get to President's Island.
Right,
There's a lot
right,
of,
sure.
and there's also, I think where they landed is a oil a distributor there on the river. It's where the barges came over before the bridge in that area. And then there was another, from Hopeville, Arkansas, up to maybe around the foot of Poplar or a little bit further north, there was another ferry that crossed there before they had bridges.
That's right. Well, that was about the same length.
Yes.
It's wider in between those two.
I think where they built the
The
Great
Elm.
Bridge, the Memphis Bridge, Morrison was George Morrison was the engineer, and he found the narrowest point, which of course makes sense, you know.
Of course, and the highest, one of the
Right,
highest.
yeah, and it is that, yes.
Well, because you had to have the height, with the government specifications of the clearance for the steamboats. The approach from the west, I have friends who are railroaders and said you had to get a tremendous head of steam to get up on that bridge to cross it. And sometimes they would actually split up the train, you know.
Right.
If you have 100 boxcars, they do 50 at a time, because it was just, the gradient going up to be on the bridge was unusually steep. Well, we're going from the bluffs to the the bayous, I guess, the lowlands. And it's also a very handsome bridge. It's really nice looking. It was absolutely state-of-the-art when it was built. And I probably tested new ways of building when they did it, because it was by far the biggest one in the United States. And I imagine it was one of the higher ones, too. Any questions? I'll ask some really interesting questions, which of course I had to have somebody in the audience. They've got a lot of railroad buffs around here, so they. I am very, very glad that the University of Memphis saw it in as one of their goals to have something that, you know, tells the story, not just of the railroads, but of one specific point in time, and how, what a great change it was as far as transferring boxcars and material, and then celebrating the bridge, which this is the 125th anniversary for.
Did you say the St. Louis Bridge was prior to this bridge earlier?
The St. Louis, at St. Louis?
Yeah.
That was designed by Robert E. Lee. He did the survey for that. He didn't design the bridge, I don't think. But the survey for of the Mississippi River there in 1835 or something.
He designed the jetties that determined the course of the river and saved downtown St. Louis.
Yeah, he did. And that bridge is, gosh, I don't know, it's a lot older than this one.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah. How old is
Wasn't
it?
it Eads who designed the one at St. Louis?
Sorry?
James Eads? You know, the Eads Bridge? It was him.
Might be.
I think it was the
Okay.
same, and the ironclads,
What?
federal ironclads.
Yeah, he designed a whole bunch of things, and the bridge was one of them.
And didn't he have the bends, and he had to watch the construction of that bridge with a telescope from his apartment?
The one in St. Louis, the stone bridge?
Yes, he had gotten the bends from too much time underwater and could not physically make it to the construction, but he had a large telescope. He located himself, we could sit in his home and watched and supervised the building via telescope and telegraph.
That's amazing.
He also walked the Mississippi River underwater. He got a diving bell. Yeah, he walked because he wanted to see what the bottom actually looked like. So under a diving bell, he walked the entire length of the Mississippi underwater.
But didn't go upstream.
From St. Louis to New Orleans. Yeah. Remarkable, that alone is remarkable. And some of the guy walked it on pontoon feet. Ask Vance had that featured not long ago, where this guy actually walked, and this back in the 30s. Actually had big pontoon feet things, and he walked the river.
But doing underwater is another whole level of difficulty.
And that may be where he's got the bends, but
Yeah.
but he walked the river.
Well, he and the Corps of Engineers were cross, weren't they?
What now?
He and the Corps of Engineers saw things totally differently.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because what the Corps of Engineers wanted, what they wanted was going to cut a deep groove in the channel, that the flow velocity was going to tremendously improve, and Eads was saying, don't do that.
Mhm.
That you need to keep that channel wider. That's why he walked the
Let
bottom
the
of the river.
flowway be
Uh-huh.
wider.
Yeah, keep it wider and slow that flow down, because fast as a flow, it's like a needle cutting into a record. It cuts a
Sure.
deeper groove. But you see who prevailed.
Sanity prevailed for a change.
But Memphis had several railroads then before the crossing, before the bridge was put in. Memphis had several railroads.
Oh, yes,
in
yes,
the
it did.
city.
It did. It was, well, they had them going east in Tennessee
Yeah, 10
and
railroads.
north and
Across the
south
river.
and then
No,
toward Birmingham. In fact, I think they built the same group that owned this railroad also did the Birmingham
Yeah.
route. And they did it, I think, just prior to this, as I recall. So-
1887.
Yeah, it was 87, so
Moved to
5
Birmingham.
years before that. And I actually have this book for that railroad, if we could just find a home for it.
You know, originally they, going southeast, they planned to go to Selma, Alabama. But Birmingham started booming, and that was a
Yeah,
better
yeah,
location.
yeah.
In 1890, there were 10 railroads that came into Memphis, and if you count the ones that came to West Memphis. And there were 52 trains daily going in and out.
1890.
So, you know, this is just prior to building the bridge.
That wasn't good. Well, the river must have been full of barges then. It was,
Oh, yeah.
gosh, it sounds like a potential
I think
disaster.
by 1915, they got up to like 150, 1920 got to like 150 railroad trains a day.
I don't doubt it.
What
Well, this-
road goes through Huntsville, from Memphis to Huntsville?
Southern, the old Memphis, Charleston,
To Charleston?
that was the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, in Tupelo, not Tupelo, in Huntsville, there's a old train station that was built just before the Civil War, and that is the exact copy of what the one they had here in Memphis.
Yeah.
So if you ever get down to Huntsville,
That's
you
torn
can
down.
see what,
1968.
you can see what
Right.
the terminal did look like.
Which building? Because we had about 3 here.
Well, it's just one of the southern, what the.
No,
Memphis
Memphis
Southern?
and Charleston.
No, but the station here, was it the one that was torn down was Union Station?
Well, they tore all of them down. but
Yeah,
they-
but I think my question is, magnificent building, that they
Yeah.
put the headache ball to it and tore it down, urban renewal.
Was that down near Danny Thomas, north of,
It's
The Memphis and Charleston
Yeah.
depot was, yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Just
Back in the
north of
day, I
Madison, I think.
kind of remember where Pop Tunes was.
And Union Station is where the bulk post office is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's, yeah, it's a shame they didn't reserve several of the stations that were existent at this time. Because some of them were works of art. They were really beautiful buildings.
They didn't build Union Station until 1912, but you did have a train station where the central station is today. It was, they called it Calhoun, Main and Calhoun. There's been a train station there since